What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 64, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I have a great interview with Mike Maharrey for everyone. He's the communications director at the 10th Amendment Center and the managing editor of the Shift Gold website. He hosts the Friday Gold Wrap at Shift Gold there, and he constantly updates the blog at the 10th Amendment Center, keeping you up to date on all the movements going on to try to get a little bit more freedom at the state level. He's the author of 4 books, including most recently Constitution Owner's Manual, which I'll have linked in the show notes page. Mike's been on the show plenty of times before to talk about things like defend the guard and ending qualified immunity. We update the status of those movements today, but mostly talk about gold and markets and how gold could bring us more freedom and undermine the federal government and the Federal Reserve Bank and all the evil institutions that we're constantly fighting against. So check out michaelmaharrey.com. Again, links in the show notes page, and support the 10th Amendment Center. Share this show at Conflicts of Interest on YouTube. If you're not already, make sure you subscribe there. If you're listening on YouTube, hit the like button so we could get the show out to more listeners. You'll also find the show at thelibertarianinstitute.org, where I'm the news editor and write the daily news roundup. Also check out antiwar.com. All right, the last thing I want to do before I get into the interview is thank the sponsor of the show, which is Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde sells great CBD products. The website, palomaverdestore.com. If you go there, you like CBD, you could check out the lab test results to make sure that these are quality products that's going to give you absolutely what you want and have the effect that you want and consistently work the way you want them to. If you're new to using CBD, you could check out the education tab and see how CBD could possibly help you. They have products there, extracts, they have soft gels, they have gummies, they have all kinds of products for your dog as well, if you're interested in trying to improve your dog's health with some CBD. So palomaverdestore.com, use the promo code PEACE there, and you'll get 25% off at checkout, and you'll also let them know that we sent you from the show, and that helps to support the show. So palomaverdestore.com, promo code PEACE, get yourself some great CBD products there. And now let's get into the interview with Mike Maharrey. Hey Mike, welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kyle. Thanks for having me on. It's always a fun time being on your show.
Well, I appreciate having you on. And, we've talked a lot about the 10th Amendment Center stuff, especially Defend the Guard over the past few years. But one thing that you do a lot of that we haven't, I don't think really had a conversation about at all is gold. And you do some work over at Shift Gold. I have, the Shift Gold Friday Gold Wrap podcast that you do? I have the latest episode up here. Old Joe Takes the Wheel. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Like what, a lot of people in my audience maybe have a little bit of money to invest or something like that. And of course, GameStop's in the news and Bitcoin's in the news. But, I came to the Ron Paul movement in the days before really Bitcoin was a big deal thing. And everybody was talking about gold. I don't hear as much about gold, especially from the libertarian movement these days, but I know you talk about it. So I was pretty interested in, what your thoughts are about, gold, especially as we move into the Biden era here.
Yeah, big picture, I'm a big fan of currency competition. I think that's, if you look at the trajectory that the United States is on with the massive warfare state, the massive welfare state, all of the borrowing and spending, we're approaching $28 trillion as a national debt. And of course, that doesn't even count all of the unfunded mandates that are out there. Joe Biden's talking about another $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. So it's just spin. The only thing that makes that possible is the Federal Reserve. The fact that it is basically backstopping all of the borrowing. And, just in simple terms, what the Fed does is it goes into the open market. It buys U.S. Treasury bonds, which is the way the federal government borrows money, and it creates artificial demand. There's no way out in the marketplace that there would be enough demand for all of these bonds to fund all of the borrowing and spending. So the Fed comes in, they create money out of thin air, they buy these bonds, they put them on their balance sheet, they inject this new money into the economy. It creates all kinds of asset bubbles. The only reason the stock market right now is at record levels is because of the Federal Reserve. Obviously, the economy is not telling us that the stock market should be at record levels. This is all a function of this Federal Reserve manipulation. So I say that the Federal Reserve is the engine that powers the most powerful government in the history of the world. And, Ron Paul kind of, that was one of his primary policy areas, was in the Fed. And that was a thing that he actually popularized. Nobody even thought about the Fed until Ron Paul started talking about it. And, it's obvious that the Congress isn't going to end the Fed. They're not going to get rid of it. But we can undermine the role of the central bank through state, local, and individual action. And the primary means of that is currency competition. So gold, silver, Bitcoin, anything that competes with the Federal Reserve's fiat currency, I think is a good thing. So the idea is to introduce other forms of money into the system and make them more viable, more usable by individuals, so that eventually the Fed would wither on the vine. Now, this is a long pathway, but I think anything that we do to incentivize currency competition is a positive. So I'm a big fan of anything that can serve as an alternative to the rapidly depreciating dollar. I'm a little bit flummoxed, though, by some of the attitude that we're starting to see in the so-called liberty movement about gold. I think there's a lot of people that think, well, Bitcoin's replacing gold, and they've seen Bitcoin go way up in value. Of course, now it's gone down again. But it's a very volatile market for Bitcoin, and my view is that why not both? I don't understand this either or mentality that a lot of people seem to have when it comes to Bitcoin or gold. It doesn't have to be one or the other. In fact, if you think about investing strategy just in big picture, the most sound strategy has always been considered to be diversification. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. So you don't want to just own stocks or just own bonds or just own gold. You want to have a diversity of investments. So I think if you're looking to shield yourself from inflation, if you're looking to shield yourself from the depreciation of the dollar, I think it's positive to have a mix of Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies, and of course, precious metals. There are a couple of things that I think precious metals do that are a benefit that cryptos don't offer. And number one is you're dependent on the internet for your cryptocurrency. And as we've seen, government can interfere drastically with your access to the internet, not just government, but big tech companies. I would hate to be in a situation where I couldn't access my crypto. Or if you look in a situation where you have a massive issue with the power grid, you've got all of this money tied up in virtual currency that you can't access because there's no power. There's an old adage that if you can't hold it in your hand, you don't own it. And that's one positive of gold and silver. If you have physical gold, you have a gold coin, you have a gold bar, it is in your hand, it is yours. You don't have to worry about somebody locking it up or a bank holding on to it, or you can't get into your account or whatever. If you have that physical metal, then you have it. And so that's why I think gold and silver are particularly important when you're looking at investments and inflation hedges. But again, I'm not anti-Bitcoin as some people are. I just believe that you should have a diversification of those things. And, gold is the oldest form of money. Gold has been money for like 5,000 years. And that has evolved for a reason, and it's not going to change anytime soon. So I'm a big advocate of holding gold and silver and other things that can shield you from the dollar.
Yeah, all fantastic points, especially, and I brought this up to a Bitcoin person before, like how do you get your Bitcoin if you don't have electricity or internet?
Right.
And, their counter to that is look at how the government has, taken away physical gold and silver from people in the past when they've looked to exert more power, and how Bitcoin could actually be maybe a solution in those cases because you don't have to actually physically hold anything.
Sure.
And it could be, stored in a different way. And
Right.
I was like, that means that I want both, which seems
exactly.
to be your take, right? Is to do the best you can to, have something when the government comes to take everything.
Yeah.
And
Now, I want to say this too, in terms of, I think a lot of people will point to Roosevelt in the executive order that he issued, I think it was 1933, that they called it gold confiscation. And a lot of people will play on that as kind of an anti-gold thing. They're going to come take your gold. It's interesting if you go back and look at that executive order. Uh, the government never came and actually took anybody's gold. Now, they said you were supposed to give it up, but nobody was ever actually arrested, prosecuted. Nobody got their door banged on. They never actually confiscated gold. The only reason they got the gold back is because people voluntarily gave it up. So I think the idea that the government isn't come bang on your door and take your gold is probably a little bit overplayed. Not saying that it's not a possibility. With the government, anything is possible. And again, I'm all for diversification, but I think there's a little bit of a myth in some circles surrounding, the quote unquote gold confiscation. There never was actually any gold confiscation. And at this point, there's really no reason that they would want to do that. I mean, at that time, the dollar was backed by gold, and the reason that they wanted to get the gold out of private hands was they needed to have more of it in reserves in order to keep the dollar solvent. So they had to do that because we were on a gold standard. So there's not really the same dynamics in play. But the point is well taken from the Bitcoin folks. There is the aspect of the blockchain that it is much more difficult for the government to control and regulate. So again, I'm all for both. I'm not anti-Bitcoin. I'm just pro gold, and personally, I hold both. So.
Right. Well, and you point out that it's probably less likely they'll come and try and round up the gold. But as you say, if we, the less we use, the federal fiat reserve
Right.
notes, the less power the worst state in the U.S. empire has. I mean, we're committed to spend a couple $1 trillion now over the next 30 years to upgrade America's nuclear arsenal, whether that's the nuclear bombs themselves, what I think B-21s are the new bombers, new class of submarines, new Minuteman missiles, all these kinds of, trillions of dollars are spending. And so I guess I am a little concerned that if Bitcoin and gold are, undermining the currency,
Right.
and, Honeywell and Boeing and Lockheed Martin are set to lose billions of dollars. I think we could see a huge push for some more regulation. And so that's kind of where I want to take it now, which is what is like kind of the play here, or I guess the political movement on gold. I see a couple recent stories from the 10th Amendment Center that you had written up on the blog about Tennessee and Mississippi looking to make gold more of an official currency. So it looks like actually we're moving in the direction of more freedom, where the federal government seems kind of concerned with Bitcoin.
Right. It's interesting. There's been a big movement at the state level over the last, say, 5 years, maybe 10, but really kind of grabbing momentum over the last 5 to take initiatives that actually increase the feasibility of using gold and silver and crypto in replace of dollars. In terms of crypto, last year, or actually over the last 2 years, Wyoming has passed a number of bills to make crypto more accessible, more usable, more user-friendly in terms of state law. And then, as you mentioned, we're seeing states do the same thing with gold and silver. The bills that you mentioned in Mississippi and Tennessee are kind of a first step, and it's simply eliminating the sales tax on the sale of gold and silver. There are, I think, 10 states that still actually have sales tax on the sale of gold and silver. And if you think about it, it's really ridiculous when you understand that gold and silver are actually money. It's almost like going into the bank and to say I have a dollar bill and I want to get 4 quarters, and the bank says, "Oh, we're going to charge you 25 cents to make that change." They're charging you to change your money from one form into another, and that's essentially what a sales tax on gold and silver is. And of course, it raises the barrier to investing in gold and silver if you have to pay an extra fee to the government. And it makes it more difficult to use gold and silver in everyday transactions. And I think the possibility of using gold and silver and actually doing business is becoming more and more possible because of the advent of electronic transfer systems. You don't have to carry around ounces of gold coins. You can actually have a debit card that's attached to your gold account that's held in a secure location. There's a couple of companies that actually do this now. Gold Money is one that's based in Canada. There's one in Utah called United Precious Metals Company or Corporation that are actually doing this, facilitating actual business with gold and silver. So the first step, obviously, is to eliminate sales taxes. There's also capital gains taxes. There are a number of states that have eliminated those. A few states have actually declared gold and silver as legal tender. Utah, Oklahoma, I think Arizona, and maybe one other. And by doing this, it actually makes it so you can pay taxes or any bill to the state in gold and silver, which is actually what it's supposed to be in the Constitution to begin with. So all of these steps are very important. They're small steps, but they set the stage to undermine this monopoly on money that the Federal Reserve has. Now, the key really isn't the state making laws or changing laws. The key is individuals being willing to step out and utilize the opportunity, to start using cryptocurrencies, to start using gold and silver, to take advantage of these opportunities. Because as with anything, it's human beings that drive markets. It's human action. And so that's the key. And that's really, you look at something like the legalization of marijuana. Obviously, states legalizing and making it less likely that you're going to get locked in a cage for using weed has really helped that situation and that market grow. But what really drove that was the fact that people wanted to get high, or or other people who actually use marijuana for medical purposes. So it's individuals that really drive everything in the long haul. So these movements that we see at the state level, as far as legislation, they're important because they take down barriers. But the key is the human action, us as individuals investing in cryptocurrencies, in gold, in silver, and then utilizing them in our everyday lives as much as we possibly can, and expanding that as the opportunities present themselves.
So I guess it seems to me that this might be a thing that politically over the next 4 years, especially in the red states, will be something that we could really push to say that this is a way to undermine the Biden government. It's a way to maybe make his environmental whatever he's got going on less impactful and stuff like that. Right. And so I guess I know that I'm sure that especially at the state legislator level, like the COVID stuff is still probably playing a little bit more of an impact than on the national level. I know, like in New Hampshire, there's like 400 something representatives in that small state. I don't know how they're convening general meetings or sessions on like Zoom or something. I have no idea how that's working. So I imagine maybe that's more limited. But other than I got the articles again here from Tennessee and Mississippi. Are you seeing this at the 10th Amendment Center and more places? Is this something that you guys are looking to push in the next few years?
Yeah, the sound money, like I said, it's been a pretty strong initiative over the last couple of years, and it's something that we've pushed more and more as time has gone on. Some other things that we've seen over the last few years is Texas created its own gold bullion depository. The state of Texas actually owns some gold that's part of their university system, and that gold was stored in New York. They created this gold bullion depository to hopefully eventually bring their gold back to Texas, kind of a state sovereignty thing. But the Texas Gold Depository also makes it possible, again, to do business in gold and silver. You deposit your gold and silver, and you can actually transfer small amounts to other individuals utilizing debit cards or checks. So that's something that's in the works in Texas. And so, as I said, as these barriers to using gold and silver and crypto, like I said, Wyoming has really pushed this in the crypto arena as well. As these barriers are lowered, it creates opportunities for individuals to start utilizing these things. And we're definitely seeing more and more movements. I expect there will be some other states as this legislative session moves on in 2021 that will address tax issues with gold and silver. And there were a number last year. I can't remember the exact number, but of course, a lot of things that were kind of in the works in various policy areas last year got derailed because of the COVID. So hopefully this year, some of that stuff will regain momentum again. And, just more generally, we are seeing a lot of really cool efforts at the state and local level already trying to address some of the overreach that is certainly coming down the pike with the Biden administration. In fact, just this morning, the Missouri I believe it was the Missouri House committee there passed a bill that would prohibit enforcement of all federal gun control. That's not something that's already a state law. So I think we'll see more of this. The thing that's sad to me is that I'm getting so many people that are like, "Hey, Mike, the 10th Amendment Center is going to be so important in the next 4 years because of Biden." If you don't recognize that the 10th Amendment Center was important the last 4 years when Trump was in office, you're part of the problem, because the federal government is overreaching and too big and, doing all kinds of unconstitutional and liberty destroying actions. It's not a partisan thing. It's not just Joe Biden. It's not just Donald Trump. And we need to push back against this all the time, no matter who's in office.
Yeah, well, especially when the Republican is Donald Trump, who I don't think maybe didn't even know what the concept of federalism was. He just didn't seem to have like a grasp on that at all. And, referring to the Constitution here, one of the things that I remembered from grade school in the Constitution was it very specifically says that gold and silver are supposed to be money. And
Right.
so I never understood. This is just like one of those things, like you read the Constitution growing up, and then I went with my parents to the DMV, and at the DMV they only like accepted checks. I was
Right.
like, how can they? Well, first of all, not accept cash, but also the Constitution says gold and silver are payment of debt. So how could they not possibly take? Like if I went in there with a couple of gold coins or something, they should have to take that.
Right.
And I just wonder how we are that the Constitution apparently just doesn't apply at all in this category.
It's basically the same reason that Joe Biden could decide tomorrow that he wants to bomb Iran and go do it, and without ever getting any congressional authorization or declaration of war. It's just the fact that the constitutional principle has eroded so badly over time that it has almost ceased to exist today. You look at the kind of the trajectory of money. Originally, money was actually minted with gold and silver. The last silver coins were minted in 1964. Fun fact, if you look at the minimum wage in 1964, which was the last year of having silver coins, the minimum wage was, I believe, about $1.25 an hour. So that was 5 silver quarters. If you take the 5 silver quarters today and melt down that metal, the value of the metal is over $15. So there's your $15 an hour minimum wage right there. That's how much the Federal Reserve has devalued our money over time. But I guess there was a rationale at some point that, hey, we're going to hold the gold in a vault and we're going to issue these paper dollars, but they're still backed by gold. So, that kind of fits into the scale of this is gold and silver. It's at least representing it. There was a time you could take your gold certificate or your silver certificate and go to the bank or the Federal Reserve Bank, not Federal Reserve, but the National Bank or whatever, and get gold and silver. It was all backed by actual gold and silver. That disappeared completely in 1971 when Nixon closed that gold window and basically untethered the dollar completely from any metal. So, at that point, we just have all this paper floating around, which, of course, can be expanded at will with nothing backing it. And that's exactly why they did it. And that goes back to the fact that the monetary system is what supports the welfare and warfare state. It's the fact that they can expand the money supply at will to pay for all of this garbage. They can devalue your money. It's basically a tax on you. If you have $1 today, in 10 days, that dollar is going to be worth just a little bit less because the federal government's printed a billion more of them. So this is a huge problem. I think it's the root of the problem of big government is the monetary policy. And so anything that we can do to undermine that at all is I think, a positive step forward. Quite frankly, I think at some point the whole thing's going to collapse because it's unsustainable. And that's really, in the long run, what people should be prepared for. And that's really why I'm holding gold and silver and crypto. It's because at some point the dollar is going to become, maybe not worthless, but it's certainly going to be much less valuable than it is today. And I want to have something that actually is going to hold its value over time.
Yeah, one of the huge things that I had learned is actually from Erwin Schiff's book, The Biggest Con, where he actually has the dollar bills from pre and post closing the gold window, and
Hmm.
how they actually change what they say
Yeah,
on there. Where before, like, this was, clearly backed by gold, and now it's just a piece of paper that we call money. So that was just one of those red pill moments that you have when you realize that your money isn't backed by anything. I
right.
remember there was not that long ago they were talking about how much gold the U.S. even owns. They, I guess, claim to own a whole bunch, but nobody audits it or sees it. Nobody audits the
Right.
Fed. And so I guess, if we can't see the finances of the Fed, let's just stop using their money
Right.
the best we can. And as you point out, it could be a real hit to the war state. Anything else on gold and silver? As much as people really do talk about Bitcoin, I have tried to get myself some. Yeah, I don't have a ton of money, so just a little bit of silver, especially like, junk silver and stuff like that,
Hmm.
like the old dimes and stuff. And it's like impossible to come by unless you're able to drop like a couple grand on it. So there has to be a good amount of demand, because I remember it was far easier to get 2010, 2011 than it is now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just actually wrote a report for the Shift Gold website this morning. You can check those out at shiftgold.com/news, and talking about gold demand in 2020. So a report from the World Gold Council just came out, and gold coin demand was at a record high last year. So yeah, there's a tremendous amount of demand for investment gold. Uh, Overall, gold demand actually dropped last year. Jewelry demand was way, way down. Of course, about more than half of gold demand is for jewelry. But yeah, investment demand was really high. Silver investment demand was really high. I know at some point they actually were limiting the amount of silver eagles that they were actually manufacturing. So yeah, there was a supply crunch, and so premiums are really high. A lot of your precious metals companies were putting order minimums in because there's just such high demand. There are things that you can do um, to put some money into precious metals that it's not as good as actually holding the metal, but it is a way to, if you only have $50 to invest and you can't find any place where you can reasonably get silver coins, you can actually get into like ETFs, which are called exchange traded funds. They're actually funds. The funds buy gold and silver, so the funds are backed by those, and they're traded on the stock market just like regular stocks. So GLD is probably the biggest gold fund in the United States. And then there's SLV, which is a silver fund. You can actually go on like Robinhood and buy shares of those ETFs or partial shares and have exposure to gold and silver without actually having the metal. Those ETFs actually track with the price of gold, price of silver. So it's not as good, again, because you don't hold it in your hand. And if you want to get conspiratorial, you can ask the question, do they really have that gold? Um, and fair question. You can't ever actually hold the gold yourself, but it is a way to invest and kind of hold on to your money in the stock market by using those ETFs. So it's an option for folks who don't have a lot of money. Obviously, to buy it, even an ounce of gold right now, you have to have over $1,800 just for one gold coin. So it's difficult for those of us who aren't making big bucks to get into that. But and of course, the other thing you do is save and pigeonhole money away until you get enough, and then transfer that over to gold and silver.
Right. But, that's a good point, because that's one of the things that people regularly say, like, about Bitcoin over gold would be that, I could buy $20 of Bitcoin right now.
Right.
But how can you buy $20 of gold? They would say, and I guess as you say, at least for now, you could use Robinhood for that. Although I hear people are struggling to get what they want on there. I want to move on and talk to you about the thing we always talk about, which is defend the guard,
Hmm.
because it's just from my foreign policy kind of focused angle, the most important thing you guys got going on at the 10th Amendment Center all the time. And in the past years, you've had some optimism saying we're building momentum on it. I see this one now you have written up about the Hawaii, I guess, Congress is considering a bill that would block unconstitutional National Guard deployments. I'm kind of encouraged about that one because I know Tulsi Gabbard's there. She's a member of the National Guard and somebody who's generally anti-warish. So, what's the Defend the Guard movement looking like right now?
Yeah, I'm excited about that, particularly that Hawaii bill. So now we're up to, I think, five that have been introduced. And I've been told by the folks over at Bring Our Troops Home that they have commitments of close to 30 state reps on Defend the Guard. So if that actually happens, it would be huge. But five is a great start. I'm trying to remember the states. I know Oklahoma, New Hampshire, Hawaii, South Carolina, and I think there's one other. And of course, we know that West Virginia, that Pat McGeehan over there will definitely introduce it. But the Hawaii one I'm particularly excited about. I was actually on a conference call with the sponsor of that bill, and he said that last year he had the votes to get the thing passed. And of course, COVID shut down the legislature, so it never even got brought up. And during this conference call, the sponsor said that he felt like it's going to be a little bit more difficult this year because if you've ever looked at the makeup of the Hawaii legislature, it's insanely skewed to the Democrats. I think there's only like two Republicans or maybe four in the entire
Yeah, it's
Hawaii
one of the
House.
deepest blue states in the U.S.
Yeah.
People don't really think about because the votes always come in so late. But yeah,
But interesting, one of his co-sponsors is one of the few Republicans on his Defend the Guard bill. But he said it's going to be a little bit more difficult because a lot of, he could play on the Trump aspect of being president and being commander in chief to drum up that support before. He said it'll be a little bit more difficult with a Democrat in the White House, but he still thinks that he can whip the votes to actually get Defend the Guard passed. And boy, if one of those passes, then I think you're really going to see. Obviously, it'll make a huge splash in the media. It's going to freak the warfare state out, and that would be fantastic. So we'll see what happens as we go through the legislative session. But I expect more Defend the Guard bills to be introduced in other states, and hopefully we will get to that threshold of 20 or 30, because that would really make an impression, even if none of them ends up passing this time around.
So one of the things I guess worried about with this bill is just with the momentum building over time that the federal government in particular is going to look for ways to start to make sure that this doesn't happen. And the more different bills get introduced, I would guess the more attention that they're going to pay to it. And if it happened over the course of like a year or two, maybe catch them off guard. But now, we're going on like year 5 or so of this.
Right.
So is the federal government mounting any a more serious defense, or does it look like for the most part, they're just kind of making the same threats that they've been making all along?
Well, I think the pushback behind the scenes from the federal government has been intense all the way along. And if you listen to some of the interviews, Pat McGeehan, who's a delegate in West Virginia, who actually was one of the first to introduce this bill, like you said, about 5 years ago, he'll tell you that the behind the scenes pressure that they're getting from the Pentagon and from even state leadership of the National Guard has been very, very intense. The primary focus that they've used in order to kind of sway legislators is the threat of, well, if you do this, then we're just going to take all your National Guard units away. And, this is another one of those deals where, quite frankly, I think they should call the bluff because, picking up and moving National Guard units isn't as easy as the federal government wants you to think it is. But I think that's where you actually have safety in numbers. The more states that are doing this, the more difficult it becomes for the federal government to say, well, we'll just take your National Guard units and move them over to, the next door. So I think that, there's going to be intense pushback, always is. It's just like with anything, when you talk about reforms of asset forfeiture, you get huge lobbying efforts by police, and it's very effective. So it's going to happen. This is politics. There's going to be opposition, but I think the key is to stand on the principle, to continue to make the case that these wars are unconstitutional, that they are not only unconstitutional, but they're unjust and a tremendous drain on the United States, both in terms of human resources and money. And I think that the public opinion on this is overwhelmingly in our favor. I think people are tired of the wars. I think people are tired of seeing young men and women sent off to these desert hellholes for no good reason. I think when they are made aware of the human toll that we're seeing in countries like Yemen and Somalia, even today, from these military interventions, I think people are naturally repulsed by that. And I don't think that the government can make a very good argument saying, "Oh, we need to continue running these unconstitutional wars." That's not a good it's not a good look for the federal government to try to make that case. So I think this is entirely positive, and I think the more we push, the more public will get behind it, the more pressure there's going to be on the powers that be to start reining some of this in. And again, as we talked about with gold and silver, ultimately the human action needs to come at the individual level. And the more people that are aware, the more people that are saying, hey, we're opposed to this, the more difficult it gets for the federal government to do its will.
I had to imagine the next 4 years it's going to be pretty easy to make this case in the red states. You talked about how people are coming bad suddenly and like, oh, hey, the 10th Amendment Center is real
Right.
important. We need to get stuff done. But at the same time, I'm sure you're welcoming those people in saying like, hell yeah. And one of the
That's
things we
right.
have to do is we have to, prevent, the left wing Joe Biden from getting any of our young boys killed in these wars. And,
Right.
Kamala Harris could be president. Imagine, her sending your kids. So I'm sure a lot of people will not be happy with that woman sending their kids to wars. And so
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think there's a real chance to build some momentum here. Is there, for people who want to like, push this a little bit, in states like New Hampshire where you have so many representatives, I think there's actually one that listens to this show. Where can they find like information on how to either introduce this in their, body, or like what do they tell their representatives? Like if you call your representative and say, hey, support defend the garden, they say, what the hell is that? Where do they
Right.
tell them to go?
All right. Well, the easy explanation, the elevator pitch for the bill is basically that it empowers your governor to prohibit the deployment of your state's National Guard troops into foreign combat zones unless there's a declaration of war as required by the Constitution. That's the elevator pitch right there. And I think most people hear that and go, "Oh, well, that makes sense. We shouldn't be sending soldiers off unconstitutional wars." We actually have model legislation over at the 10th Amendment Center. You can actually just search it. If you go to Google, you can put 10th Amendment Center and then a colon and defend the guard. It'll actually pull up that model legislation that you can send to your state legislator. If you're in a state that's already introduced it, so say you are in New Hampshire, you can actually make a huge difference just by calling your representative and your state senator and saying, "Hey, this bill's been introduced. I support this. Please vote for it." Those phone calls are extremely important, especially at the state level. These guys aren't used to getting a lot of attention. They aren't used to getting a lot of phone calls from constituents on actual legislation. It does absolutely make an impact. You can follow what's going on over at the blog.10thamendmentcenter.com. And again, there's a search box on that page. You can search Defend the Guard or National Guard, and it'll pull up the articles that we every time one's introduced, we do an article on it, so you'll know. When your state has one, you'll see it, and that's the time to make those phone calls and send those emails to your state rep and your state senator.
Right. And for people watching the YouTube version of the show, you saw those articles. I've been displaying them today, and I actually have one more before we wrap up. And the first thing I'm always concerned about is the people that the United States is killing overseas, and our troops that were getting killed overseas, and all the negative repercussions from that. And that we're seeing the war come home now,
Right.
not only by the National Guard defense are establishing a green zone in Washington D.C.,
Right.
but apparently 20% of the people arrested from the Capitol riot were either military or veterans. And
Mm,
so I think we're seeing this war come home in a lot more ways than just on the militarized government side of it.
sure.
But we're also having a massive problem with our police killing our, fellow Americans. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I feel like it has to be the most effective would be holding police officers responsible for killing people. I think we should sue them. Even
Right,
if they don't go to jail. Imagine if they had to pay out $1 million or $500,000 every
right,
time they shot somebody. I think police officers would be a lot more careful when they pull out
right.
their guns. So,
Incentives.
yep, tell us about the incentives that they're trying to introduce in New Mexico here.
We kind of need to give kind of give the big picture here. My camera just flashed. It's
That's
really
all
trying.
right. I think we're good if you just pick up.
All right. I think it's really important to look at the kind of big picture of what's happening. You can sue a police officer for, you know, violating your rights or shooting you. The problem is that it's almost always in federal court. And over the years, there's been a judicial precedent that's been set by a number of Supreme Court cases that's known as qualified immunity. And in a nutshell, it makes it almost impossible to sue a police officer or any government official for violating your rights unless you can prove that they knew that that specific action was a violation of rights. And in order to do that, you have to basically show that this same circumstance, this same situation has occurred before. And so they should have known that they shouldn't have done it. And the difficulty with that is, of course, every situation is different, and a tiny little bit of a difference opens the door for this qualified immunity defense. And on a little side note, qualified immunity is part of the consequences of this idea that the federal government, the federal courts, should be the police over everybody. Every time that the Supreme Court makes a decision, it applies it to all 50 states. So as a result, we have qualified immunity in all 50 states because all of these cases end up in federal court and they're all subject to qualified immunity. So, what's the solution to this problem? Well, the solution is to create a state process that allows people to sue under the state constitution instead of under the Bill of Rights in the federal constitution. Every state in the country has a Bill of Rights. Many of those state Bill of Rights are actually better than the federal Bill of Rights in terms of actually, specifically protecting different rights and different aspects of our freedoms. And so, what states like New Mexico, the bill you mentioned, Colorado has already passed this bill. It's been introduced in a number of states. It creates a state process under the state constitution. When it's in the state courts, the federal courts have no jurisdiction, and then qualified immunity doesn't have to apply. Anytime you get in the federal court system, you're going to run up against qualified immunity. So this New Mexico bill, in effect, what it does is it allows you to sue in state court using the state constitution and the state Bill of Rights. And it specifically says in the bill, qualified immunity is not a defense. So you have a clear pathway where if you can prove that the police officer did whatever he or she did that violates your rights according to the Constitution of New Mexico, you would be able to collect damages, just like you mentioned. So it creates a state process. It bypasses this federal process. It's a decentralizing tool and gets around this stupid incorporation doctrine that unfortunately so many libertarians are fans of. They want to run to the Supreme Court for everything. And the fact of the matter is about 89% of the time, the Supreme Court hands down garbage that then gets applied to every state in the country. So I love the decentralized approach. There's no guarantee that state courts are going to do a better job, but at least there's 50 of them. At least you don't have one central authority allowing this qualified immunity to be imposed whenever a police officer tries to, or whenever a citizen tries to hold a police officer accountable. So I love these qualified immunity bills. They're extremely important, and New Mexico is just one of many that we've seen introduced. I think there'll be more. There's a lot of momentum right now for police department reform. So we're seeing the qualified immunity. We're seeing a number of states that are looking to limit no-knock raids, where police officers can basically bang in your door without giving you any notice in the middle of the night. We're seeing a strong movement to limit the militarization of police, to limit what kind of equipment departments can get from these military surplus programs. We're seeing some more movement in the realm of surveillance. So I think these are positive things that have kind of come out of the defund the police. Of course, we all know that's BS. I don't really want to defund the police, but these are positive things that we can take advantage of at the state and local level to not only protect people from local police officers, but also undermine this growing federal police state that we see evolving, which basically kind of sucks in state and local law enforcement and turns it into a national police force.
Right. Well, that's one of the things I like about qualified immunity is a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of completely, defunding or getting rid of the police. And part of that's because some people live in, dangerous areas or violent areas. I have
Right.
a friend who lives in Chicago, and there's already been like 150 carjackings in that city this year. So,
Right.
people feel like they need somebody to protect them. But at the same time, you don't want a cop to beat a mentally ill person handcuffed at a hospital.
Right.
And, according to the federal government, it's one or the other. You know what I mean? You either get protection from the thugs who want to carjack you,
Right.
or, and you have to allow peace to beat mentally ill people, or, you can't have protection. And so
Yep.
that's why I feel like qualified immunity may be a way forward here,
Right.
not because it's going to end police abuse necessarily, but it's going to give people recourse. And look, once one cop in a police station gets sued for $500,000, I bet a lot of other cops in that police station are going to start acting a hell of a lot differently. And
Right.
so,
And there's also, if you believe the mantra that you often hear that it's just a few bad apples, then hold those bad apples accountable. Get the bad apples out of the barrel, and allow the good cops to do their job. And to me, this is another one of those things that's just common sense. Of course, police officers should be held accountable for their actions. It's absurd to think that they shouldn't be. It's absurd that we've created this system, this justice system that allows for this kind of legal wrangling to even occur. And so again, I think this is another issue where your average person has an ounce of common sense is going to look at it and go, yeah, that's a good idea. And so this is a way for us to push these things forward because again, they have popular, they have popular support, and I think it's important. And again, it's a decentralizing force, and it helps push back against this big police state that's growing.
right. Well, it's not a silver bullet, and there needs to be more work, especially at places like the 10th Amendment Center on issues like civil asset forfeiture and, ending police militarization. Although I did hear that Biden rolled that back probably to like the end of the Obama era levels, so we may see a little bit less of that. Although it's not like you only need one Bearcat for a police station, so once you already have it, it's not like you need a second or have anywhere to put it. But maybe at least slowing down the police militarization a little
Well,
bit.
and the fact of the matter is that the Obama era didn't slow it down all that much either. I,
Right.
I did some reporting for Kentucky on the amount of equipment that was flowing into local police stations from these federal programs, and it was astounding, even during the Obama administration. So, anything that the federal government does to limit itself, you can probably look at it and go, "That's not a limit."
Right. Yeah, I think it was during the Obama years that like one of the school districts ended up with like grenade launchers or tear gas launchers and
Yeah,
ridiculous
yeah.
stuff like that.
I mean,
But
the I think virtually every state university in the state of Kentucky has assault rifles.
well,
Assault rifles.
they need it just in case another Kent State happens, right?
Well, yeah, of course.
And
Well,
murder a bunch
those,
more
those
students.
those frat parties get pretty wild. So
Right. All right. Well, I mean, I that's all I had for you. Plug whatever you got going on. If there's any other big issues at the 10th Amendment Center you want people to pay attention to, you can mention it. I put stuff in the show notes pages and tell people how they could, support you specifically.
yeah, well, like I said, right now we're just getting into the very beginning of what we call nullification season. It's when most of the state legislatures are in session. Most of them, I'd say probably about half of them are in session now, and then others will join them as we get into February and March. This is the time that you really want to keep up with the blog over at 10th Amendment Center, blog.10thamendmentcenter.com. And just check it out. It's worth a daily visit just to see what bills have been introduced, what's passing, what issues we're working, what momentum is growing. And when you see things that are happening in your state, again, make those phone calls to your state and local, or not local, but your state senator and your state representative. It's a great way to just track what's going on. If you want to support the 10th Amendment Center, we would certainly appreciate that. And you can do that over at the 10th Amendment Center.com website. We have membership for like $2 a month. So, just a little couple bucks, not even a cup of coffee anymore. You can help support our work and keep the lights on over at the TAC. And so we always appreciate that. And, if you're interested in keeping up a little more with the whole realm of gold and silver and what's going on with the Fed, keep up with that kind of thing over at shiftgold.com/news. I write a couple of articles a day over there covering what's going on at the Fed and what's going on with gold and silver markets. And if you follow along, you'll start to learn a little bit more about what quantitative easing is and how the Fed actually manipulates the bond market and how all of this stuff works, which, I had no idea when I first started really how much of an influence the Fed has. Everybody always wants to blame the current president for what's going on. And oftentimes it's not that at all. It's that central bank. I'll give you a good example. The other day, a friend of mine was complaining. He was like, "Oh, look, Biden's in office and gas prices are going up. It's all Biden's fault." Well, gas prices were going up before Biden took office. And the reason they're going up is because the Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, and that's creating an inflationary effect. So we've seen the price of oil go up above $50 a barrel. Now, certainly Biden's policies, shutting down the Keystone Pipeline and talking about limiting drilling and that type of thing, that's going to create supply issues, which will push the price of oil up even further. But right now, it's primarily a function of inflation. We're seeing the same thing in a lot of commodities. Agricultural commodities in particular have really skyrocketed. Soybeans, corn, all of those things that are dollar sensitive are going up. So, it's not always the president. Oftentimes it's that behind the scene, the deep state, and the Fed is certainly a big cog in that deep state. So I got a little off tangent there, but anyway, shiftgold.com/news. We'll keep up with all of that stuff over there. And
I like the, I recommend the Friday Gold Wrap for people who maybe don't want to read every day or something like that. A little short podcast at the end of every week on what's going on in the gold in the markets.
Yep, 15 minutes or so.
Yep. All right. Well, Mike Maharrey, thank you so much. You worked tirelessly for Liberty. It was your birthday this week, so happy birthday. If people need a little bit more incentive to support and share your work and all of that, give him a little bit of a birthday present.
Give me some love because I'm getting old.
Right. Well, I mean, you can't be that old because I noticed you were playing goalie yesterday on your birthday in hockey. So that has to be pretty rough. And you're up here today doing a podcast. So I really appreciate you giving me your time this week. And again, everybody check out his work. Constitution, the Owner's Manual is a great book to check out, especially if you want to talk to all of your right wing friends and be like, no, you're being unconstitutional. These are the rules that we have to follow. We got to limit our government. He makes the case for it right there. So check out his work. I really appreciate your time today, Mike, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.